Appreciate everybody coming out. My name's Zack Gramana. Today I'm going to be walking you through a cool new integration that we've worked on as part of a partnership that we've recently announced with Gimbal. Gimbal is the leading manufacturer of iBeacons. They provide iBeacons to Apple stores, Starbucks, and as it turns out, there are several hundred iBeacons right here in this very stadium, and at most major sports venues in the United States. They've captured a lot of attention recently after having been spun out of Qualcomm. And if you've been playing around with iBeacons, you've almost certainly either heard of Gimbal or have even gotten your hands on one yourself. Today we're going to spend most of our time in code and actually in the Gimbal Manager because I think most people are pretty familiar with the basics of iBeacon, which I'll be happy to recap briefly. iBeacon was announced by Apple, I think it was about 2 years ago now. It was based off of the Bluetooth LE standard and was a set of patterns for advertising proximity, allowing small, low-power Bluetooth LE devices to broadcast beacons, which then can be detected by phones or other devices, and then from there identify the location and determine how close they are, and then from there take actions. So iBeacons have since gotten a lot of traction in all kinds of industries and use cases, from retail to gaming to industrial applications. And what's nice is pretty much every modern mobile device now comes equipped with a Bluetooth LE compatible radio that's capable of both transmitting and receiving iBeacons. There's a great potential for mobile developers to incorporate proximity and contextual awareness into their applications just by taking advantage of low-cost, low-power beacons. So with that said, I'm going to kind of drop out here of the PowerPoint and take a moment to walk you through, that's on the right thing, take a minute to walk you through PowerPoint's menus. A demo app, as well as a new Couchbase Lite connector that allows you to very seamlessly integrate Couchbase Lite with the Gimbal SDK on mobile devices. So we start here with the basic Gimbal application. This is the sample app that they have, and with me here, I've got a transmitter in my pocket. I have one of the smallest and lightest weight gimbal beacon. It's powered by a simple coin cell battery, and is now being used in my physical device here to detect proximity. It sees that I'm now within range of this Connect 2015 place, which we'll talk about in more detail in just a second. But in my sample app now, I can actually go in and I can find some basic information about each of these things, each of these different sub-locations within my place here. And in this particular one, we're now at the press dining location, and so I can see I've got a bunch of schedule information for the conference. And so what's interesting is it sort of appears deceptively simple, but when I came within range I was able to detect the place, and then using the Gimbal SDK, I was able to find a sync gateway channel based on some information that we provided when we configured our place in the Gimbal Manager. And based on that, then, I was able to get a channel of content that was rich content, that was very application-specific content, as we saw with the scheduling information, then come back through Sync Gateway. And that was all based on a location trigger via iBeacons. So let's walk through what exactly we did so you can begin to see the preparation steps that are needed to take advantage of Gimbal beacons. And then we'll get into the more detailed specifics of how that worked in this particular application and how you can take advantage of this Gimbal adapter in your Couchbase Mobile applications. So next I'm going to switch over here to the Gimbal Manager. Hopefully everybody can see this okay. So when you first log in, you have a couple of quick applications or quick tasks that you can go jump into. But for most people, it's going to begin with beacon activation. So what will happen is you'll get one of these, and right off the bat, you'll have to pop it open. And inside there is a, it's a 9-digit number that you'll need to add in to activate your beacon. It's a very straightforward thing. It's printed on a nice yellow tag. And once it's activated, it will then show up in your list. We can name them. So in my particular case, I've got a few beacons spread around the valley. I've got 2 here in this building. I've also got one in our Mountain View office and one in our San Francisco office. And so we can do a bunch of things, like we can verify their firmware levels. We can get a quick read on what their battery status is. We can even see which version of Gimbal's firmware we've got loaded on them. And when you go through the process of activation, you'll also need to use the Gimbal Beacon Manager, which I'm going to show you right here, which is also a mobile application. And so it's a little maybe not quite intuitive in the setup and documentation that Gimbal provides, but the most critical step is actually something you need to do on your mobile device. So when you can quickly see all of your beacons within range. I can see these 2 here right now. And then once you've popped open that Gimbal in order to read the factory ID number in there so you can activate it, when you close it back up again, it will be in a mode where you can update the firmware. And also you can update the configuration settings. Now, if I had cracked this one open, it would immediately prompt me if I want to update the firmware, all that good stuff. But in most cases, depending on the type of application you want, you're going to want to balance out the battery usage of Bluetooth beacon updates with, I guess, the immediacy of how quickly you're notified of proximity changes. So if you're, so Gimbal kind of categorizes these use cases into kind of basic proximity or presence optimized proximity. And in the case of presence optimized proximity, you're sort of staying within the location or outside of the location of a beacon for longer intervals. Like very typically you're at your desk, or you have a device that doesn't move very frequently, or maybe it's a crate or something like that. Where repeated background updates via Bluetooth are not going to result in much change. And so all it's going to do is wear both the transmitter's battery down and your mobile app's battery down. So you can do things like upload new presence-optimized firmware when you've configured your beacon. And that will all happen, again, when you use that phone app in conjunction with the settings on the website. So you would choose the various particular firmware or configuration items you want. And then the next time you configure it by popping out the battery with that app open, all of those updates and all of the configuration will get pushed up to it. So the key takeaway, though, is with Presence Optimized, it's going to send background updates at a much lower interval, throttled down to somewhere around once a minute. One of the key differences between a gimbal as it comes sort of out of the box and a standard iBeacon is iBeacons send out 100 advertisements per second. And they do that to ensure that a person moving by quickly is going to get one of those beacon updates because the radios themselves are not on all the time in order to help minimize battery drain. So they need to broadcast frequently enough that they'll sooner or later hit a transmit while the actual phone is listening for that brief moment in time. All right, so once we've activated our beacon, it will prompt us to create a place, which is the core concept in the Gimbal SDK, or we can assign it to that beacon into an existing place. So here you can see I've defined 3 particular places, the Connect conference here, our headquarters, as well as our San Francisco office. And you'll notice briefly, and we'll drill into this in a second, that there's this channel colon and then some additional text there. So once we go into the place is the highest level aggregation or the highest level abstraction of a position or location event. And so what you can do is use a combination of iBeacons, either grouped together or just by themselves, or you can also use geofences or any combination thereof. So geofence capability is built into both iOS and Android as a core feature, where you can set a GPS coordinate and a radius, and the operating system will send you an update or a notification when a person has entered or exited from that kind of virtual bubble on the Earth. And that ends up making things really powerful. So then if you're using a geofence, take, for example, a place like a stadium like this, where on a NFL football game day, you may have 70,000 people quickly overloading both the built-in Wi-Fi as well as the external nearby cell towers. And this is where Couchbase Mobile becomes a huge asset to you. By having the integration ready, all of the content you need to be able to take advantage of proximity notifications and iBeacons that a user is going to find within the stadium won't be sacrificed by the lack of consistent internet connectivity. So what we want to do is make sure that whatever content we want to be able to provide to people based on their location or proximity to a location in the stadium while they're offline is preloaded onto their device before they actually get into those bad network conditions. And a geofence is a great way to do that. So as an example, you can see here I've set one up on our San Francisco headquarters. So what you want to do in this case, when you're entering into one of these scenarios, is build your geofence quite a bit larger than the actual event area itself. Because the goal is, as they're approaching their destination, you want them to trigger a Couchbase light pull replication so that all of the content that they would potentially need during their time there, whether it's an event or just day-to-day usage, or maybe they're going to be going underground or something like that, or even into a remote area that's fairly rural and has poor network coverage. You can see you can set the radius on your geofence quite large. So once we kind of zoom out at the high level, I could even, if I know I'm going into a city or an area that's going to have spotty coverage, then I can make sure that well in advance, when they enter into the geofence, that they're going to trigger that replication and sync everything down from Sync Gateway using Couchbase Mobile. So we can also then, once we're in the location, also continue to get updates and information within that geofenced area by using the beacons. And to do that, we need to associate the beacons with our place. And once we do that, both the Gimbal SDK as well as the Couchbase Lite adapter will then take and properly index your report and properly index your information, so you're able to keep track of where things are within your location. And then you can set some other nice things like how strong does the signal strength before you declare that somebody's arrived at a beacon, and how weak does the signal strength need to be before you consider them no longer in the proximity of that beacon. This is a process I've kind of personally discovered of a bit of trial and error, because in the modern era, when everything is broadcasting on the same very small limited frequency range, there is a lot of unpredictable behavior in the signal strength. There'll be moments where it's very, very low, even though you're nearby it, and then there'll be times where even though it's far away, all of a sudden you'll get a big jump up in the signal strength temporarily. But by and large, they have some tools like smoothing that let you control this, and you can customize it on a per beacon basis, as well as having sort of a default for the location. But the most critical piece here in the Gimbal Manager for integrating in with our adapter is this area for attributes down here. And you can see I've already added in one attribute. It's just a basic key value pair. The first key is channel, and then the second key is my Sync Gateway channel that I want to store all of the content for that particular place in Sync Gateway. So now when I jump over to Sync Gateway, you're going to see I pre-created some place records here so that we can take a look and have a better understanding of what this means. So I have my 3 documents. You'll notice these are some big, kind of gnarly looking keys here, but those are actually coming from the Gimbal Manager. So you'll see up here that the Gimbal Manager is assigning an identifier to a place. So we continue to use that inside the Couchbase Lite adapter. So now we can see those locations, and we can see now that we've got our 3 locations based on those channels. And then we can go and see the sync function here that we provide with the sample application. That will take all of the appropriate information. Here we've got our gimbal places as well as some visit information, where we can do things like only let the admin add in places. So if I'm building an application, let's say that's targeting maybe one specific venue, maybe it's a specific retail location or an event location, something like that. I can, my job's pretty easy, but if I'm at a retailer that has maybe 1,000 different locations with 1,000 different places being represented, I want to make sure that I've limited the ability to modify those documents.
For climate weather conditions, when the detection will be difficult, do you have any function to say with this detection of weather, this is what you want to do?
I think, so the question was whether when there was inclement weather and detection was difficult, whether, yeah. So more specific, are you referring to GPS there with clouds or?
What happens is any electromagnetic wave, not just including this, when depending on the weather, it depends on precipitation, it depends on foliage, depends on a variety of things.
Yeah, so in the case of the GPS component, which would be a geofence, if you're choosing to use a geofence, by setting it particularly broad, you're actually sort of embracing a very wide error range in the GPS coordinates. So all GPS devices report an error circle within which that reading is considered accurate, more or less. So on a great day, you know, that with optimal conditions, that kind of circle can be down to just, you know, 3 meters, and some, based on some technology, even less. But, you know, in a city, I've certainly seen this with our San Francisco geofence, for instance. Your actual entry point into the geofence or exit from the geofence maybe a couple of blocks away from where the circle is showing you on Google Maps. And that makes sense. You've got city buildings and multipathing and all these things. So that's why I would recommend a particularly broader geofence than your area, not just to accommodate people who may be driving and things like that, where they're moving through your geofence rather quickly, but also in the case of handling the vagaries of low accuracy GPS readings. But in the case of Bluetooth iBeacons, though, that's very near range, so there's effectively no environmental influence other than the radio environment. So yeah, then we can see we've also got some things, we'll see in a little bit. There's a concept of a visit. And a visit is when the Gimbal SDK detects that I'm now at a place, and then it enter the area and begin the visit. And when I exit the place, then I'm departing my visit. And so we can do some things like if they're just arriving to the location, what we're going to do then is grant the user access to the particular channel that a place document has been created for. So let's look a little bit more now, specifically at the structure of a place document. So what's nice about the place documents here in the Gimbal adapter for Couchbase Mobile, and specifically Couchbase Lite, there's only a couple of things that it really needs these documents to have. One, and probably one of the most important, is this channel key here. And so you'll see, obviously, the channel and key, the channel and Connect 2015 key value pair mapped directly to the channel, and in this particular case here, that would be Couchbase SF. But as we saw earlier, even when we're at this high-level list view, we can see our key value pairs here with channel and Connect 2012, 2015. And that is the primary means of connecting up your data from Gimbal all the way down through the mobile device, then back up through Sync Gateway, so that you can unlock and push down and sync down all kinds of rich content. So Gimbal, apart from having just a couple of simple key value pairs, doesn't really provide facilities for you to unlock content based on proximity or location. And so that's a key part of what you'd be using Couchbase Mobile to provide in your application, is the ability to tie content and content availability to your specific locations. But in addition to that, Sync Gateway gives us a number of neat opportunities to do some other cool things. Because we now have, for instance, things like our visits in a channel, as well as just the basic information about a location, it's very simple for us to do very easy things like count how many people are here. So we can build a MapReduce view that shows all of the people who have an arrive time, but no departure time. That's during the same duration that we're there for. And then we can see, oh, very simply, it's just a count of documents using a very standard Couchbase-like query to see who else is here. You could even do things like see if any of my friends are here. These are all now very trivially easy things to implement using the combined integration of Couchbase Mobile and Gimbal. So you can see in this particular case, for my 2015 document, for my 2015 place document, I have the channel that we were describing earlier. I have some things like the description of the event. I have a set of locations. So each of these locations now, you'll see, has got this, again, kind of this very rough-looking, not very people-friendly ID. But what you will see is that they map exactly to an iBeacon identifier as provided inside that little yellow label when we pop open the gimbal. And so that's what then again allows us to map the updates that we're receiving as we move through your location and be able to tie that back to your content that you've already provided via Sync Gateway. So now, I've now been able to tie that particular beacon to the press dining location here, which is where we're at right now. And so that's how we can tell, okay, I know you're in this particular room right now. And now we can, for instance, provide all of the sessions that are going on at this location. And so this comes actually from the JSON that's in our actual Connect conference app. And so that allows us to do, like we saw earlier, where I could then go look through very quickly the content for a particular location once it's been downloaded. And the best part about all of this is all of this information now is available even if our internet connection has been clobbered by 70,000 drunk NFL fans. Or bad weather, or the fact that we've maybe gone underground, or we're at Golden Gate National Recreation Area in the north area of the Bay where there's pretty lousy cell reception once you get out there. So we can continue to take advantage of our location awareness.
You're not depending on the accelerometer, etc., and the other sensors to detect whether someone has moved. Based on that, you're assuming you're not even depending on it. You're depending only on the beacon. Yeah, so the question was confirming that we're not using the other sensors on the mobile device, like altimeter or magnetometer or accelerometer, gyroscope. That's correct. So in this particular case, it's entirely up to you as the designer whether you want to only use the Bluetooth radio and just do iBeacons, or whether you also want to use the GPS receiver. So you have your choice, and that obviously is going to depend very much on your particular use case and what the goals are you're trying to accomplish. But you certainly could, for instance, use the gyroscope and magnetometer to do dead reckoning, things like that, if you didn't want to use GPS. When they move, you can know exactly how many within a meter radius you can take.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that's definitely outside the scope of what we've got here. Okay, great. So I think at that point we've really covered the most critical parts of the gimbal side of things through the Gimbal Manager. So we've seen what bits of information we need to provide and configure on the Gimbal website, how we get that configured into our iBeacons, and even how we model our data so that it's able to pick things up. So let's go dive into the code next. Okay, so the key part of this new capability is there. By the way, can everybody see this okay back there? Is the text big enough? Holler if no. Okay. So this is the gimbal, the Couchbase gimbal adapter. So in this particular case for iOS, this is actually an Objective-C category on the Couchbase Lite database object itself. And what that means is that we've now, at runtime, enhanced the capability of the actual Couchbase Lite database object itself and taught it how to be location aware using the Gimbal SDK. And you'll see that we're adding two new methods here that we would invoke ourselves: start location monitoring and stop location monitoring. So in the sample app I demoed at the beginning, we took advantage of this. So when our app launched and we displayed the screen, we did some basic initialization. So we set up Couchbase Lite and got it configured. We began a bidirectional replication with the Sync Gateway that's running on my laptop. And then you'll see we also set up 2 additional lines of code that are gimbal specific. So we first needed to make sure that we had the Gimbal SDK and the Couchbase Lite SDK available in our application. And you'll see over here in our frameworks, we have Couchbase Lite as well as the Gimbal SDK, and that we've imported those headers into our view controller. And once we did that, we were able to initialize a Gimbal Place Manager and then set the delegate, to this case, to our Couchbase Lite database. But because we were taking advantage of the category, we were able to then cast our database to the Gimbal Place Manager delegate. And this is the part that then allows Couchbase Lite to be able to respond to iBeacon data or iBeacon notifications as well as Geofence notifications and immediately take care of putting documents into the database for you. So real quick, we can take a quick look at what that means. There's a bunch of dense code here. But so we saw the start monitoring and stop monitoring. But we also internally in the implementation of the adapter, which you don't really need to know, but it's good to know where the code is, and if you want to look at it or customize it. We do the work of then taking one of the callbacks, one of their 3 core callbacks that Couchbase Lite will then handle for you when you begin a visit. This is when we either enter into the geofence, or if we're not using geofences, but we're actually using just iBeacons, when we first see and we first hit the threshold for seeing one of the beacons we've configured in a place that we've defined. So we'll get some of the visit information that includes the things like the place itself, a number of other things. But what we do for you, so that you don't have to, is be able to turn all of these notifications into standard Couchbase Lite documents that then can get replicated back up again. So we have a couple of document types, and we saw back in our sync gateway sync function that we were taking advantage of those particular types. So we define a gimbal place, which maps exactly to the place that we were working on in the Gimbal Manager, as well as the gimbal visit, which was, again, our particular session at a place when we enter and when we exit. And then we also have what are called sightings. And sightings are Bluetooth identification or Bluetooth beacon notifications when we're at a place. And so in this particular demo app, I've set up both geofences and iBeacons. So in order for me to exit a place in the gimbal world, I have to both no longer see the iBeacons that I've configured as part of that place, and I need to be outside of the geofence as well. So one of the nice benefits of this is that I can use a Couchbase Lite a document changed observer or listener or event to fire on that visit document. And then I can use that to drive like a little local push notification on my device, say, hey, thanks for visiting, as they're driving away. Cool things like that. But then we can also use that to then remove them from that particular channel if we wanted to, or maybe that's a good time for us to do one last push replication and sync everything that might have happened while they were offline back up, and then purge the database to clean up any deleted records or things that we didn't need anymore. So that's probably about as deep as we'll go into that. The bottom line is we're doing all that work for you. But in those documents that you're getting, you're also getting quite a bit of additional information, like the signal strength from the beacon, as well as the name that you typed in. Some of the other things, like all of the beacons have a built-in temperature sensor, which is pretty cool. So I can quickly see what the temperature looks like in the various conference rooms when I'm in San Francisco. You can configure some other things like icon URLs through the Gimbal website as well. And yeah, so then finally, as we get back over here in the application, so now we've initialized Couchbase Lite. We'll take a quick peek at what that means. We've set up replication. We've started replicated, and then we called that new start location monitoring method that we've added to Couchbase Lite. So in our Couchbase initialization, we're going to do a couple of things here that are outside the kind of normal stuff you would do when you use Couchbase Lite. So first is, many people never use filters in their Couchbase Lite applications because a lot of times they just don't really see much of where you would need one. But filters turn out to be a very useful thing for us in the integration. One of the kind of quirks about the particular beacons that I was using is that every so often, well, actually, I'll skip the filter and come back and look at validation function first. Every so often, one of the beacons will report a completely impossible signal strength of 127 decibels. And there's no particular way to prevent it, but it can interfere with the rest of the logic we've written later on. Like, for instance, if we've got some UI that shows you whether you're in range or out of range for a specific beacon within your location, it's going to make it look like you're inside the radio somehow if you were to actually let that go into the database. So what we do instead is we take advantage of a Couchbase Lite validation function. And in this particular case, if I see it come in at that 127 decibel erroneous reading, I reject it so that it won't get into the database and then it won't show up in my live queries that I'm using to drive both the user interface as well as other business logic. So that's a particularly nice, handy feature here. Then the second part, going back to filters, a lot of people don't use filters on push replication because generally speaking, they like to push everything that's been modified on the local device. But we actually, in this particular case and in most cases, don't want to actually push the sighting document changes. So when we're getting these beacon updates coming in, that's stuff that we don't really care about. It's really useful to the application user because that's letting them know where within the place they are. But really what we care about from analyzing later is the fact that they were there on a specific date and time and they were there for a certain amount of time. But we don't need to know necessarily their second-to-second changes. And again, because we can't always correlate these exactly to a specific location, they're not super useful. So in this particular case, we're going to actually push up to Sync Gateway into our Couchbase server cluster the visits, but we're going to specifically filter out the gimbal sightings. And because we're using a standardized set of type values in our documents in the adapter, it makes it very easy for you to use these hooks to then take control of how the data is both being written and updated, but also to be able to build your views and your queries around that. So I think at this point, any questions? Yeah, so a lot of people are tempted by iBeacons to do triangulation. And triangulation is, for people who may not be aware of it, if I can take the signal strength for, at a minimum, 3 locations, and very often more than that, what I can do is draw a circle of where, for each one of those points, where somebody would have to be or how far they would have to be to get that particular signal strength. Because obviously as I go closer, it's going to get higher, and if I go farther away, it's going to get lower. So I draw that circle for that given signal strength, and then based on the other ones that I've seen, I draw those circles, and where the circles converge together, I will get a point. And that point is a very good approximation of a person's location. Well, if you have 3, you'll have 2 points where the lines overlap. If you have 2 points, and then by adding in a third, then you'll get a very small area that converges on a point, yeah, from which you can take the center and get a specific point. And of course, the more you add in the kind of the better you can average out some noise and things like that. But going back to what I mentioned at the beginning, where the fact that there's a lot of congestion on 2.4 gigahertz means that ironically you get your best. It's easiest to do triangulation when you're out in the middle of nowhere, because as it turns out, a couple of times I've been in places that were pretty isolated, and the values that you get on signal strength are very smooth and consistent. But in a typical, especially urban office environment, they vacillate wildly, even when you're not moving, because of all of the constructive and destructive interference going on right now. I mean, there's probably, I would guess, probably somewhere hundreds of, if not thousands of 2.4 gigahertz transmitters going on right now between infrastructure here at the stadium as well as all of us with all of our 2 or 3 wireless radios apiece. It makes it very nonlinear and non-predictable. So effectively what that means is the center points of those 3 circles are jumping around all the time, which makes it very hard to get any kind of meaningful location information. So typically people will combine it with a few other sources of information like a gyroscope or some other things.
Are there examples of indoor location or indoor navigation?
There may be. I'm not a gimbal expert, but I do know, I've seen conversations where multiple people have discussed that. And it falls down usually right specifically because of the interference problem and the fact that the points that you're triangulating against appear to be always shifting when in fact they're not, but in the radio world they appear to be shifting all the time. So it makes it very difficult to have anything reliable for navigation. Interestingly enough, there's a company that has been able to do it by taking magnetic profiles of a room. So like for instance, all of the chairs in here are changing the magnetic field in the room. And because every device that we have in our pockets now has a digital magnetometer in it, which we normally only see in the Compass app, but what they can do is then take a unique fingerprint and signature and use that. And so a lot of people combine multiple different sources, whether it's gyroscopes and dead reckoning. So I know the starting point, and then I use the gyroscope to figure out how many turns and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sure there are examples, but it takes a lot of compute power, even for today's mobile devices, which burns batteries fast. And it's very hard to get consistent, solid readings for that.
What real-world examples have you seen with Couchbase?
I'm sorry?
What real-world examples have you seen with Couchbase?
So it really wasn't a complete arbitrary use case that I picked of coming to a stadium with football fans. Because that's a very common use case for some of the people that we've worked with. And a lot of retailers are similarly interested. In fact, I've talked to quite a few Couchbase Mobile customers and companies evaluating iBeacons for that specific purpose. And so like a common retail use case is somebody's walking by a store and you want to be able to do like a flash sale and say like, hey, if you come in the store, we saw you walking by. If you come in the next 15 minutes, we'll give you a 20% discount on your first, on any one purchase item. And what they're trying to do is entice you where you may have walked by 1,000 times. Now you're sort of, okay, yeah, maybe I'll do that. As a simple example. But another great example is, let's say it's game day here, or in this use case can be reproduced to a number of places where I went in, I used Couchbase Mobile to then preload all of my rich content, and now I'm effectively offline, but I'm moving around. I can detect that I'm near the beacon, and that beacon represents Bob's Hot Dog Stand. I can do one of a couple of things. My app can then push up, hey, here's the menu for Bob's Hot Dog Stand. Do you want to place an order? So while I'm standing in line, I could actually be putting my order in, so that way when I get to the front, it's ready and I pick it up. Now, a lot of times the Wi-Fi is broken down, and your Wi-Fi order might not go in. But by using peer-to-peer replication with Couchbase Mobile, I don't have to worry about that. I can actually replicate directly and sync directly with Bob's hot dog stand. So I'm not reliant on any wireless infrastructure at the stadium.
Just a question, because it feels like it would be really good to have the same capabilities on Wi-Fi. When I detect the Wi-Fi and when it goes away. Do you have any? It feels more useful than the GPS-based geofence system.
Yeah. So there's Gimbal per se doesn't speak to that because their stack is is the Bluetooth LE. But that being said, you could do something similar using kind of network reachability APIs in iOS and in Android and Linux, and those kind of vary too by which language you're on. But like for instance, we use the .NET ones quite a bit across all the platforms, and I know Java's got some outside of Android as well. But in those cases, what you could do is actually there are commercial databases that you can get of pretty much everybody's Wi-Fi access points with a corresponding GPS location, and that's how all of the phone companies and all of the mobile providers fall back to Wi-Fi triangulation when GPS isn't sufficient.
But there is no direct Couchbase integration.
No. Yeah, we try hard to help you guys, but yeah, we haven't gone down that road yet. We're just trying to get the iBeacon story, first. But it's an interesting use case, and it's certainly something that this is going to be an open source adapter up on our Couchbase Labs, and you could certainly use it as a template on how you could approach that. Yeah, and certainly, yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, and again, most people are combining multiple bits of information. If you really do want to do like indoor positioning, it's typically combining multiple sensor sources.
How did the Couchbase grab the information of the user?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is part of the basic, so I use the standard basic sample app that's part of the Gimbal SDK. And so what you do here, if I remember correctly, yeah, there's one of these spots in here where you, maybe in the app delegate. Yeah, so I just did the naughty thing and just embedded the string in here, which you aren't necessarily always going to want to do. And don't worry, this API key will probably be gone in the next hour or two. So if you're looking for a freebie, you'll have to go get your own free account. But yeah, so right off the bat, you use the Gimbal SDK to register your API key, and that's how they then know that this is your app. And now from the user perspective, that's actually a Couchbase Mobile feature. So you'll see I have two users defined, demo user, that using basic HTTP auth, the user is demo, and admin. And when you go look at the sync function that we provide in here, so we have this handy little shell script called SG. So if you're on Unix or Linux, you can, most specifically, this one is it's going to be specific to iOS, or to using it on OS 10 rather, but it'll start Sync Gateway with a pre-configured sync function and all that other Sync Gateway configuration. And if you don't, and it'll actually install the latest version of Sync Gateway for you in your local directory, not permanently, but just temporarily while you're using the app. But then we just use, in this case, we're configuring, we're disabling the guest user in our Sync Gateway configuration, and then I'm creating the demo user, making sure that they're enabled, and it's just passwords, demo, and then admin. And then in the code here, when we set up our replication, you'll see we're using CBL authenticator, basic authenticator with demo. There's also a little shell script that's included in this repo in the sample data folder. And what you'll see about this is that it requires the use of admin. Because if demo tries to update the place documents, it's going to reject them. And we saw that in the sync gateway sync function, where we use the require user security primitive, which means only the admin username, only somebody logged in as admin can actually write changes to this. Because we kind of want these to be kind of this immutable public data that anybody using the app can get. But what's theirs are when they visit the place or when they leave the place, things like that. We don't want them actually modifying the place information. And it's the place documents that are actually have all the rich application data that's tied to that location. So that's all stuff we want to control and not the end user. Great question. Sure, you can. Right. I mean, so Couchbase Mobile has an impressively flexible role-based security system. So in this particular demo and use case, I decided that this is what made sense for the demo. But certainly, yeah, you can take this. You can build up hundreds of roles that all have very specific read-write combinations of permissions. So yeah. In the beacon? The beacon doesn't, all it has is its kind of little identifier that it can broadcast out. It really doesn't have any storage capability at all. That's what we're using Couchbase Lite to leverage. Right? We're leveraging Couchbase Mobile to do that. And of course there you're bounded by the size of your phone, storage availability, as well as the size of your backend Couchbase server cluster. So you can store a lot of data. Oh, sure, yeah, I'm sorry, I lost track of time. So thank you, everybody. I'll be around if you have any further questions, and feel free to reach out to me directly.